throw back in dialogue with people who are irrational. That was it.
Yeah.
Talking to her.
Well, I was just talking to Jesse as he was coming in because Jesse, unfortunately, is part of a generation that is, moving further and further away from, as a generation, not as he made it very clear, his friends, but unfortunately, as we're seeing across college campuses, people that are openly celebrating this, which again, I mean, to me is kind of ironic, seeing as how they're trying to be politically correct on campuses, except for when it comes to anti-Semitism, which is still
It's
allowed
not
to
the
go.
other way. I was gonna
What's
ask you a couple things about that, because I just read a news article, because a whole bunch of Harvard econ students just got blacklisted from Wall Street.
Yep.
Because
That's not exactly what happened.
they got threatened with it.
They're all saying now, they're all backpedaling, saying we didn't know what we were
Yeah.
signing.
This is the funniest thing.
Yeah, and I'm reading it, and I'm like laughing,
A bunch of
but
students at Harvard signed a thing saying that Israel is taking everything
Yeah.
that's happened to them.
Yeah,
And they
so they're
put
gonna get
it
flooded.
out there,
It's not
and
just
then
Harvard.
one woman right away got a job and.
well, the other
lawyer-
story is the president of the NYU Student Bar Association
Yeah.
said Israel bears full responsibility for this tremendous loss of life. Okay, so the law firm that was gonna hire her, Winston and Strawn, this is a big New York law firm, said, yeah, that job offer we made you, we're rescinding it.
Yeah. So what's your,
About $200,000 a year,
so what's your take on that, Jesse?
Take on what?
On people losing their jobs over,
I mean, that's the thing is like. That's us playing the left's game the right way. The left wing, the atheist redditor types are always saying, oh, it's freedom of speech, not freedom from consequence. Okay, there's your consequence. Like you apply to a place called Levi and Strom. Like, do you really think they're gonna be okay with you saying, yeah, Israel deserves to get bombed? Like, no.
so here,
You're
so.
gonna get fired from that, and that's
So,
hilarious for you.
so that's our point, is that there's gonna be consequences for what you do. And look, you have a right to say what you want, but you also have to deal with the consequences of saying what you want. So I'm just gonna pop it up here because this was Channel 7 News last night. Welcome to everybody who's joining joining remotely. We got people all around the world. Hopefully you can hear us. I'm gonna do just for a second, I'm gonna mute my mic and turn up the mic on the computer. Got everybody in, and
I can't see the participants from far away. I
yeah,
don't see.
oh yeah, I'm gonna do it in a second, Joyce.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Well, I kind of actually wanted to catch everybody here right now because we have a nice group here tonight. But
Yes, you have.
I'll zoom in a second. But I want to play you what the news captured from Santa Clarita. It's from Santa Clarita yesterday. So we don't have, do we have Texas on here yet? I don't see the Schulmans from Texas yet.
They
Well,
should be.
I don't know. It's okay. Maybe they'll be on in a second, but I wanted to show you what happened in our neck of the woods yesterday with the protest. So I want to tell you, we had people that were worried about coming to the protest. Okay. We had people that called me, texted me, called the other rabbis, texted the other rabbis, asking them, are we going to have security? And we had it all lined up. We talked to the sheriffs ahead of time. The mayor spoke to the sheriffs ahead of time. Interestingly, we didn't see any sheriffs until we had this incident, but as soon as the incident happened, they were right there.
Good.
I thought they were going to be there the whole time. As soon as they were there, they made the counter protesters. Oh, here are the Schulmans. I was kind of stalling for them. As soon as they came, the sheriffs made them go across the street and said, you can't be here and you can have your protest, but you got to do it on the other side of the street. So, I got there early a little bit to make sure we would have our area. Look, I knew that there would not be a large turnout. How did I know that? Because I know that these people are cowards, and I know that.
Maybe 30 at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'll show you. You can see them. But I have a video over it, and you can.
Hi.
So Schulman's, welcome. We're going to show you our a little bit of what happened at our rally yesterday. So again, I knew that this group was coming because they posted it on the social media. First of all, I want to tell you that Monday night, when we posted this on Monday, the What's Up SEV got flooded. I mean, right now I think it's a 1,400 comments about about our rally, and they were all, I mean, not all, but most of them were pretty negative, and they were pretty bad, actually. It was really bad. Yeah. I mean, you would have thought that this area was insane, right? But really insane. And so we looked at it and it was like, this is all crazy, right? So then like people were like, well, when the people who are organizing this read this, they're going to be scared to come out. I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like I didn't post, but I was going to be like, are you kidding me? So I organized this and I'm not afraid to come out. So because I know you won't be there. So there were about 1,300. So then when they posted, I was going to try to find the post, the What's Up SEV post. Then the Palestinian folks that organized this counter protest, they posted their thing. And then the weird thing is that there were like 1,000 comments against that. So what you saw in that was actually the stupid social media machine where people don't really post anything positive. They just want to tear people down. So it doesn't matter what you post. It wasn't like there was a commensurate amount of people supporting the Palestinians once they put up their thing. It was everybody tearing down that. So it just shows you that the mentality of what people, how people respond on social media. It was like a perfect, test of what happens. So, I mean, you don't believe me, go on What's Up SEV and you'll see the same thing. You're like, why were those people who were so negative about the Palestinian project, why didn't they counter what those people were posting in the first place? So it's just weird how people get triggered by this. Anyways,
I was very pleased, Mark, that I held my grief group, which was from 4 to 5:30, so I couldn't be there. But I think 2 or 3 people from my group.
Oh yeah, they were.
Came,
They were there.
and I was delighted.
They were there.
They were there.
And Reverend Andy was there, and I could have had other clergy there. I wanted him there, and he was there because I talked about this at Yom Kippur, and I wanted him there because he knew that I basically said, hey, we're not gonna deal with this again without responding. And
Right.
But he's a real man.
He is. And like politically, like emotionally, as a Christian clergy person who's not evangelical, not fundamentalist, he's not quite as, adamantly, stridently pro-Israel as an evangelical Grace Baptist minister will be. It's just not their wheelhouse. It's not even like my buddy John Shaver, who used to be there.
Right.
When he posted something that like, I'm praying for peace for everybody. I mean, he reached out to me right away and said, this is terrible. And he posted something on his Facebook, but even he was like, he didn't come out and say, hey, let God rain wrath down on the Palestinians, which there are Christian clergy saying that. And they're from the evangelical side. So anyways, this is what happened yesterday. So I'll just show you. I'm going to turn off my mic here and then play it through.
You
have it muted?
No, he's playing a video.
What does it say? Your sound on?
This is a video
Oh,
of the sound. So he's.
Yeah. Okay, let me do this.
You know,
So this is the video that that we had that somebody posted up on what's up SCV. Let me see if I can,
I don't know what this is.
here,
I
Yvonne.
don't know what it means.
can you guys hear me now? Oh,
Yes.
yeah, you can hear me now. So I'm gonna play this video. I'm gonna play this video. And here's the one that people saw. Oh, wait, hold it.
It shows on the bottom that the.
Yeah. Hold it. Hold it a second. Well, hold it a second. Yeah, for some reason I can't show this one, so I'm showing it on the screen. Hold it. Let me show it again. Hold it a second. Here.
Oh, there it is.
What's showing?
No volume.
They really look angry.
He really looks angry. Yeah,
What does it look like? 2, 3 people?
he really looks angry.
The people that were there reporting back to me said it was wonderful.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. That's not a question. It was definitely wonderful. What I wanted to show you was that even in our community, you can
Yeah,
you can
that
get
shocked
that.
me.
And that woman drove through the parking lot, honking her horn, and she looked like she was trying to run into people. I don't know that
Yes.
she would have, but Kelly, it turns out it's her neighbor. We didn't know who she was. We didn't know who this woman was. No, not the Palestinian, the one who was confronting her, the one who was shouting back and forth. It was written up in the paper what happened, the confrontation. The
Yes,
confrontation was written up in the Signal today. That, by the way, I can show you, and I will show you because you might as well see what the write-up, because the write-up was very positive, other than the
very
fact
positive.
some people, and again, I'm saying I didn't like, your back is in the picture 100%. You made the paper again, Mike. Your back is in the clearly your back, your blue shirt was there. I was going to tell you. Mike Schwartz was in the paper again, but
Oh, good.
why was his back? We know who it was, but
But I
what?
thought it was 200 or more
Yeah, I think it was more like
rallying and
honestly,
50 against.
I'm maybe not the best person because I tend to overestimate, but I think there was at least 300 people there.
Oh,
And
good.
on the other side, there was maybe 20. So they said it was 50, and then
Yeah.
and they said there was 200 for us and supporting Israel. And I got to tell you, I'm pretty sure there was more like 300, and it was like to 20. So they
From
made
the
it seem like it was a
pictures I
little.
saw, you're
It was a
right.
little bit more balanced, which is one thing I
You were leaving last night, Mark,
yeah.
and there was a car that stopped and they were pro-Palestine. He got a ticket.
Oh yeah, we heard about that. We heard he stopped right in the middle of the street. So yeah, no, but what I didn't like about the story was that if you look at the headline, it says rallies over violence in Israel draw hundreds to City Hall, which seems to imply that they were competing rallies from the
Right.
outset. So that's the one thing I didn't really like about it. There's Mike right there. There's Mike, a Mike spotting in the paper right there. We know that it's Mike, and there's Esther. There's Esther Stern in. There's Esther Stern in. There's a hand. I don't know whose hand that is, but we definitely know that that's Mike. And there's Mike from the front, by the way. There's Rick. There's a Mike spotting from the front. It's pretty clear, Mike. Where's Sheldon? Sheldon, you're in here? Oh, there you are. Yeah, there you are. There you're there. So, oh, there's Cheryl. She's pointing. She's counting people.
Oh, Margaret's great.
She was counting people. So here, yeah, so here was the height of the Palestinians. And again, I mean, there's like 10 here, another 15 here, maybe there's 20, 25, but there was not 50.
It didn't look like it from the pictures that were forwarded to me.
Yeah.
No, there's Margot.
Yes.
And so here was the story about the here. Yeah, there's Cheryl again. Cheryl got right.
Yeah, there she is.
So here's what it said. It said, there's Todd Carb, the back of Todd's head. He was the first responder who got into the JCC, the North Valley JCC, when it was shot up. Here it is, right here. These rallies, one brief skirmish erupted when a pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel demonstrator was pepper sprayed in the city hall parking lot by a pro-Palestine supporter. The woman who was pepper sprayed, who declined not to share her name, that's your friend.
No, that was another woman.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm positive. Robin was, and if you play that, there's another woman to be kind of in the early part, and I saw the pepper spray, and Robin was that one. Robin was, and then another person who came and took Robin away, saying.
Okay. Well, here's what happened. Here, and I heard about this, and this is how the sheriffs came. The woman who was pepper sprayed, who declined to share her name, said she was trying to intervene and prevent a confrontation with a pro-Palestine supporter from becoming violent. A witness on the pro-Palestine said the woman who brandished the pepper spray felt threatened while she was trying to park amid the pro-Israel crowd. She wasn't trying to park amid the crowd. She was trying to run people over. And she was trying, if the very least, to try to, break up what we were doing, trying to drive her car into that. So it said the air cap will wait. Her air cap on her tire was missing, as though someone might have been trying to take out the air, right? So supposedly what I heard, and again, I had a witness to this who told me this, who was a friend of mine. The woman who was pepper sprayed declined to press charges, so no one was taken into custody. The woman who brandished the pepper spray waved the Palestinian flag and led pro-Palestinian chants for about 2 hours after the incident. So it's the Allahu Akbar lady that pepper sprayed, just so you know. So, but here's the thing: the woman that she pepper sprayed maybe appeared to, at least according to my friend, take the air out of her tires. So that was what happened. And if that is, then somebody told me she's a member of Beth Shalom. So that's why she didn't press charges, because according to what my friend told me, she 100% was trying to take out the air of her tires. So anyways, she still shouldn't get pepper sprayed over that, but that's why the sheriff came out. And I can only tell you that was the worst it got. But I told my wife, and again, I'll just kind of finish with this. I told her because my wife was like, these people are going to show up, and I don't want it to get out of control. And she knew that people were calling her and saying, "You don't want to go because we're afraid." And did Mark talk to the police? And I'm like, she saw me talk. She heard me talking to them. She saw the she was right in front of her when I was talking to the sheriffs, and she saw the emails. So I said to her, I said, honey, I said, just know, be prepared to bail me out of jail tonight, because if something happens, I'm not going to start it, but I'm also going to jail. It will not happen with me not going to jail at that point. And then I talked to the rabbi from Chabad after that conversation I had with her, and he had called me, and he was telling me his people were worried. And I said, honey, I said, I've already told my wife that she may be bailing me out of jail later. I said, I said, I don't know what you're going to set up with your wife, but you'll figure it out. And he says, look, we'll do it. He said, we'll do a l'chaim behind bars if we have to. So that's what he said. So he was pretty riled up too. And he was pretty angry. I sounded like the voice of reason last night, but obviously I was pretty agitated. And thank you. And I pretty much, explained that. And there was a calculation there in every, like, I didn't know Margot was going to come yesterday, but I had invited her to come last night. And that was on my part, because I want to make it very clear to people that this is the same type of behavior as we saw in the Holocaust. This is not
Right.
what we saw in 1973. It was not what we've seen in other wars in Israel in the last 75 years. This goes back 80 years to the Holocaust. And so people needed to hear from a Holocaust survivor that what's happening now is the Holocaust. So if you're,
That was excellent.
if you're okay with the Holocaust and you're okay with this, that's where you're at. And that's what I wanted to make sure that people understood, that this is not about your feeling about the Israeli government or about settlements or about anything else. This is about whether Jews can be murdered in a pogrom or a Holocaust type situation. Yeah, and it showed that the city were there, and I didn't invite. The only people that I knew were going to be there were Jason and Marcia, for our mayor and our city councilwoman. I had no idea that any other people would be there, and so Kip Muller came, George Whitesides came. Another guy introduced after was a person who was running for the assembly. His name is Gibson. I never met him before. He's a retired sheriff. Thank you. And then I went then.
She said,
So he was there, and then somebody from Pilar Schiavo's office came up and said she wasn't there, but she sends her best. I didn't want to turn it into a political thing, and I just wanted people, and I wanted everybody to see that that the people who are coming out are going to be strong in this. And I told George Whitesides, who was there, who's running for Congress is going to be running against Mike. I said, look, you better get your position paper out on Israel now. Because I had totally coincidentally, I had reached out to the AIPAC people. Now that I think about it, that's really weird. I reached out to them last week and said, I'm going to tell you what day this was. Wow, this was Thursday. Thursday at 12:55, I asked if anyone had gotten this guy George Whiteside's position paper. 12:55 on Thursday.
Wow.
Saw it. And I saw him there and I said, is your position paper on Israel out yet? He goes, no. He says, but I'm talking to AIPAC. And I said, maybe now you'll understand why this position paper needs to be very clear and very strong. He goes, the events of this week are definitely going to impact the position. So we'll see. We'll see. Obviously, I haven't seen the position paper that he's going to come out with, but he's the one who's going to be representing the Democrats against Mike, and he better come up with a very strong position paper. So that was just coincidental, all those things coming together, because again, I didn't know he was going to be there. What? Well, let's see what he does, Jesse. Let's see what he comes up with. But I put him on notice that, want to see the position paper. So let's see what he does. And I'll give him the benefit of the doubt until I see it. But I can tell you that for whatever it's worth, he's not a great speaker, but that's okay. I don't care if he's not a good speaker, as long as his positions are okay. But we've had other politicians out here who are not good speakers. But anyways, I said, look, when you're running, we'll have Mike, everyone will come out and talk about Israel when they come out, because I've always given everybody, that I've had Mike, I've had
Marshall should hear this.
Hill.
Both sides. You've always had both
Always
sides.
had whoever runs for that, with the exception of one person who never contacted me anyways. It would be easy for me to say that I said no to her, but I didn't, and I never said no to her coming out, but she never asked. So let me tell you that yesterday, when we had Margot come here to class, some people were here. I spent about 20 minutes after that class crying. So I was very emotional. I went in the other room afterwards. And then when I went home, I took Sheldon back to his place, and I pretty much spent for the next half hour crying. And it was pretty tough, because I knew what she was going to say about Israel. I did not know what she was going to say about her own experience as a child growing up in Germany.
That story.
I had heard the story, but she had never told the story at the synagogue before. Mainly, she never told that story because most of the time that she's here, there are kids here.
Right.
And she knows better not to tell that story in front of the kids. But if she tells that story in front of the kids, I don't know what to do. You can't unhear that story.
But you know, that, you know.
So, and she didn't tell that story to me until probably 2 or 3 years. It was around COVID time when she told me that story. So, about how she was sexually molested as a 9-year-old.
And she's been. a tough
She's,
member.
she's, I don't think she wrote about it until I don't think she wrote about it like that though.
Told me about it was when.
Yeah, yeah, when she was getting on the boat in
Is it
in
not
Bremen.
your book?
Last book.
It's in the last book. It wasn't in her first book. The book that she wrote, The Shadows at Night, where she talks about her leaving, she did not talk about it there.
Oh, no, not, what's the last book again?
Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy.
Yeah, that's their book.
Yeah, she says it in there, but she only wrote that book 4 years ago. She never told the story. I mean, yeah, so that's where, again, the emotions of her telling that story while, Jewish women were raped this week by these people. I don't even call them people, whatever, whatever, however you want to describe it. I don't like to use the word terrorist because like we've had terrorists before. One of the things that I saw that came out of I can't remember which Israeli journalist said it, is they actually called them Einsatzgruppen, which were the Nazis that rounded up Jews in the invasions of Poland and Ukraine. The Einsatzgruppen were the mobile killing squads, and in many ways these were the closest things to that, or rampaging, Cossacks during the pogroms. That's the closest that you can get to that. So, so that's when she said that story, that combined with what had just happened. I don't know which hit me or the combination of both, but it being the father of 3 daughters, I whatever it was, just I couldn't stop. So I better stop talking about it now because it's going to get me emotional again.
We're lucky to have her.
Yeah, we're very lucky, and we're very lucky to have somebody who's been able to live to see this, and to teach us firsthand and to hear that. But golly, man, on the other hand, why should, the fact that someone had to live to see this twice, that also seems cruel. But thank God she's still alive. But gosh, 80 years later to have to see it again, doesn't seem right. Doesn't seem like the world can get out of this. Anyways, it's a good segue, by the way, to the Bible, because the Bible tries to do this. Ironically, over the last few weeks, we've been reading about the laws of war, and gosh, we saw almost all those laws abrogated in the last couple of days. We've been talking about the fact that the Torah prohibits that kind of stuff because it would happen, and it just did happen. So we saw that. That's amazing to think that, we talk about it, we say it's there to prevent the behavior 3,000 years ago, and this is why. And it overlaps a lot with sexual behavior, and actually that's what we're going to be reading about today. So last week we read specifically about somebody who, the last thing we read was about someone who accuses his wife of not being a virgin, and then basically trying to get out of his responsibilities. That actually continues on into what we read today. And it talked about the last words that it says are, "Thus you will sweep away evil from your midst." That's a phrase that we're going to see over and over again, which has to do with, again, behaviors that if they're allowed to happen, will cause the end of society, the end of a civil, civil protections and and it collapses, right? This all collapses. So where we're going to continue today is kind of like this line, and I mentioned in this Torah portion, there's a lot of laws. A lot of them are like a potpourri, a mixture of laws. I'll say in one line, put a railing around the roof of your house, and then talk about something else, and then talk about a bird's nest. I mean, all of those things were last week. This week, a lot of what we're going to read, at least to begin with, are about what happens with regards to sexual behavior, which is interesting. So there is a theme here, at least at the beginning. So the law here in 22, this is chapter, we're right here in chapter 22, verse. If a man is found lying with another man's wife, both of them, the man and the woman with whom he lay, shall die. Thus you shall sweep away evil from Israel. Again, very similar to thus you will sweep away evil from your midst. Now, of course, this is a law against adultery, and it has to do with
Well, I knew that.
it is obviously it's one of the 10 commandments. So it is not a real surprise here, other than the 10 commandments. It doesn't say what the penalty is. Here it actually says it's death. Now, of course, people have pointed out, is this all forms of adultery? There is an issue here, which of course it says that the man is married and the woman he lays with is another man's wife, right? Which means that she's married. It's not a prohibition against the man sleeping with an unmarried woman. It's a man sleeping with another man's wife. Now, again, this is reflective of a time when a man would be in a relationship with a woman as his wife that was also had a legal and financial responsibility for her. And so there definitely was a sense that this is the underpinning of society, that if this happens and people don't figure out a way to stop this from happening, it's going to cause chaos in society. There's definitely going to be more to be said about this. Okay. There's definitely going to be some further explanation on this. Do you want to share anything, Jesse, that Prager has in that commentary on that line? Okay, because the next line is going to kind of give us something else about that line. So the previous line was about that, and now hold it one second, Harp. So here's the next law. In the case of a virgin who is engaged to someone, if another man comes upon her in her town and lies with her, you shall take the two of them out to the gate of the town and stone them to death. The girl because she did not cry for help in the town, and the man because he violated his neighbor's wife. Thus you will sweep away evil from your midst. Let me finish the next law and you'll see. But if a woman comes up upon the engaged girl in the open country and the man lies with her by force, only the party who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the girl. The girl did not incur the death penalty, for this is the case like the one party attacking and murdering the other. He came upon her in the open. Though the engaged girl cried for help, there was no one to save her. Now, didn't say that, but the assumption is that she would have. So if she's in the city, the obligation for her to cry for help would prevent her from being raped or attacked or having sex, essentially, against her will. So the assumption there is that she should make a noise. On the other hand, if it happened where there was no one nearby, the assumption is she did make a sound, and therefore the person is punished. Now, I mean, obviously the laws are there to protect women from being attacked. And the assumption from the first law that we just read, that people who are violating they're violating the marriage contract that existed, there's a question of whether that's happening in this case. Now, look, it says here an engaged girl. What happens with the married woman? Well, the assumption's the same, because with the engaged girl, they're also saying, look, even if she's only engaged, this is what the rule is. So she hasn't even necessarily slept with her husband yet. If she slept with him, it's even more so. But so the law actually protects a woman from the standpoint of if even to some extent, if she had consensual relationships with the guy not in the town, the assumption is that he took her by force. So the law is actually stricter for the guy than it is for the woman. I just want to make that point before we get into the point of, well, they're executing people for committing adultery. There's no question. We just read that in the previous law. We know that. Were people executed for adultery? Perhaps, but we also don't know whether they're really even executed for serious crimes, including murder, because there is a very high standard of proof that had to be met in order to execute somebody. So, were they executed? Maybe, but maybe if they were also being executed for these other crimes, including murder, where again, by the rabbinic period, the rabbi said a court that hangs someone every 7 years or kills someone every 7 years, but they use the word hang, is considered a hanging court. If it does it every 70 years, Rabbi Akiva says it's considered a hanging court. So at least by the rabbinic period or the later rabbinic period, it didn't happen a lot. Did it happen at all? I mean, I guess they're saying it happens, but it doesn't happen a lot that people were executed. So they're not being executed for murder, most likely not being executed for these other laws that are punishable by death in the Bible. Why? Because the standard of proof that you have to establish for them, meaning there have to be witnesses, there have to be testimonial to the witnesses of their veracity, there has to be people who warn them that the activity that they're about to do is punishable by death. Again, it becomes so difficult for people to be punished with the death penalty that most likely it wasn't. Were there other punishments? Yes. Could they, fine somebody or whip somebody? Absolutely. But executing them was probably difficult. At least the rabbis seem to say that it was difficult for them to do this. So again, the law is primarily meant to protect the woman, and to some extent, it definitely is sending a message to people to be very careful what you do. And keep that in mind, because it's not just this law. If a man comes upon a virgin who is not engaged and he seizes her and lies with her and they are discovered, the party who lay with her shall pay the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and he shall be his wife. Because he has violated her, he can never have the right to divorce her. Now, you're going to say to yourself, well, now she's forced to marry this guy? Well, first of all, you have to understand what just happened. The man has to pay the husband, the father, about 5 times, 6 times the value that he normally would have had to pay. So there's clearly a punishment for this. And on top of it, he can never divorce her, which means he's responsible for maintaining her the whole time. Now, most people would say, oh, well, that's not fair to her because she has to be married to somebody that she hates. Yes, and according to Jewish law, he can't force himself on her sexually ever again. He can't do really anything to her other than pay for her and to support her in the way that he is responsible to based on Jewish law. So he's this is not a good situation. This is not something that someone would like to do, because this would literally cause them not only a huge monetary problem of essentially overpaying for a wife in the first place, but then having to sustain her for the rest of her life.
So a woman, obviously in biblical times, could not get a get.
A woman in today's times,
No.
a woman in today's time still cannot get a get necessarily. She can't initiate it. Not in the Orthodox world. In the conservative and the Reform world, and again, most conservative and Reform Jews, most, not all, I want to say everybody, but many conservative and Reform Jews don't go through the process of obtaining a get anyways anymore. Most Some do. I don't want anybody to say, I know somebody who got a get.
Yeah.
I know people have a get. The get is the Jewish bill of divorce. Okay? Understand that get has to be initiated by the man, by Jewish law. In the conservative world, again, a woman can initiate the get. In the reform world too, except again, most reform and conservative Jews don't even bother. But in the Orthodox world, a man has the ability to decide whether he has a get, gives a get or not. Now, let me make it really clear. Throughout Jewish history, the idea of a man refusing to give a woman a get was virtually unheard of. Why? Because if he ever tried that, he would be, if not beaten up, he would be driven from his community and never seen again, and possibly even murdered if he would refuse to give his wife a get, because it would become a community, an assault on the community. And what do I mean by that? If a woman wanted to be free of her husband and he refused to do this, and it still happens in the Orthodox world today. And Orthodox law, I would say, kind of encourages this, because Orthodox rabbis have let this happen, and it happens not in California too much, but in New Jersey and New York, and places where there are large Orthodox communities. If a woman in the community is known to be abused or is being treated poorly by her husband, which definitely happens, and guess what? People know about it in an Orthodox community because they're in everybody's business, just like they are in our business, like we're in each other's business. In the Orthodox community, it's a whole nother level of intrusion. So if you know what's going on, and if you watch some of these movies and TV shows about the Orthodox world, you've seen this before. Everybody seems to know what's going on with people. The rabbis know, the community knows, the woman, the Rebbitzin knows, whatever, everybody seems to know. If it's known that the husband does not treat his wife well and will not give her a get, and she wants a get, the community, the men of the community are allowed to beat the man to the point of him begging to give the get. It's allowed. The rabbis allow the man to be beaten to the point where he's begging to give the get.
I have seen films.
Do you understand that? They will beat the guy senseless. Now, you're wondering,
Does it happen?
it happens. It happens every year. It
Okay,
happens more likely, I'd say, happens in New York a little bit, happens in New Jersey a whole lot more. And I'm gonna say it because it's New Jersey, it's just the community in Lakewood is especially notorious for doing this to their people. And that's thousands of people. Yeah, Joanne.
Israeli Film Festival, one of the years, I don't recall. There was a film about getting a get, and in Israel, of course. And it's very difficult for the women to get it.
Listen, it's harder today, especially in Israel, because, well, I'll get to that in 1 second. That's a good point. I'm going to get to that. What happens is, now you wonder, I just want to make this point. How do the guys of the community get so crazed that they'll beat the guy up? Right? Like, where does that come from? Like, the guys will take on that role. First of all, they do it because the community is a closed community and the people don't go to the police when they have a problem. Okay? Just know that. They don't. It's like the Amish, it's like the Native American communities. They do not go to the police.
No, they take care of themselves.
Take care of it themselves. Just understand that. They take care of it themselves. What happens in these situations, and we know that it happens because it's been happening we've been taking care of business for 2,000 years when we didn't have our own country. What happened is, this is really what happened. The women of the community would shut down the mikveh and say, they're not going to the mikveh until their husbands take care of this. They went on strike. They'd go on strike. And so the men, after a few weeks, would take care of business. They'd say, okay, we'll take care of it. And so they knew that if they didn't take care of it, their home life was not going to be happy. Let's put it that way. And so they took care of it. So there are cases of it throughout history of the community gathering behind a woman. So to get to Joanne's point, what's happening in Israel today and why is it harder in Israel? The reason it's harder in Israel is because men, unfortunately, in Israel are able to hide behind the fact that they'll just move to another town, or they don't necessarily live. They have this weird situation in Israel where, there's no reform or conservative rabbis that can do weddings in Israel, right? I can't go to Israel and do a wedding. I can pretend like I'm officiating, but the certificate has to be signed by an Orthodox rabbi. So everyone in Israel has been married by an Orthodox rabbi. If they got married by a non-Orthodox rabbi, it's because they got married in America or Europe or somewhere else. There is no reform rabbi, conservative rabbi, who can do a wedding in Israel. Not one, not any. Never happened. Never happened. So only the Orthodox rabbinate is allowed to do conversions. Only the Orthodox rabbinate is allowed to do weddings. Bar and bat mitzvahs they don't care about because it's not really there's nothing. The kid is a bar mitzvah and just has to read Torah. You can do that anywhere, but weddings and that and funerals are kind of a little bit in between. But it's more like I could do a funeral in Israel. Okay, so everybody has an Orthodox marriage, and they have to get an Orthodox get in order to be divorced in Israel. The problem is that Israeli law doesn't allow for somebody to beat up somebody to give them a get. Israeli law won't protect a community to take care of business. They'll protect the person who's refusing to give their wife a get, and people know that. There have been cases of people in Israel who've actually been arrested by the government for refusing to give their wives gets, but it doesn't happen a lot. And it's like only in the most flagrant violations does that happen. On top of that, a lot of the people in Israel who do that, they do something really bad, which is they leave Israel and they move to another country. So there are a lot of cases, not hundreds, but maybe hundreds, not thousands, but too many of women who can't get gets in Israel, and they can't get married to somebody else. So that's it. It's a problem. They're called agunot, and that's one of the movies you're talking about was called Agunah. It's about women who are chained women who cannot get divorces in Israel because it has to go through the Orthodox rabbinate. Now, there's been a discussion in the Orthodox about giving a get that is essentially, if 100 rabbis can get together and sign a document, if they can all agree to sign a document, it's called a heter mea rabbanim, a document of 100 rabbis that would cover it, but they haven't come up with that yet. They can get 100 rabbis, believe me. They just haven't figured out the way of doing this. For what? Yeah, but essentially, if you had 100 rabbis, you could basically invalidate the guy. You could basically say the wedding, the marriage has been annulled, and the woman can get remarried. Look, let me make it real clear. The woman can get remarried anywhere outside of Israel. She just can't get married in Israel. She can't get married by an Orthodox rabbi outside of Israel. So if she wants to get married in a non-Orthodox world, she can get married. Okay, just make that real clear. I'm not saying that that's fair. I'm just saying I want to make that clear. If she doesn't like the rule, which I don't like the rule, if she doesn't like the rule, get married in Cyprus, get married in America, get married in Europe, and you can be married. The issue is you can't be married according to in an Orthodox synagogue.
One last question.
Yeah.
Man and wife in Israel are married. Leaves the country.
Yeah.
What about her?
If he leaves her
Yeah.
and won't let her be divorced,
Right.
that happens.
What happens?
She's stuck.
Really?
If he refuses to get, now he can do it from where he is. She doesn't have to be there. He can do the get, say he moves to England. He can do the get from England. Done. It's
Right.
fine. Goes to an Orthodox rabbi in England, signs the get, it's done. The problem is if he doesn't want to do it. And that's where you can make the argument. There should be a group of guys that go around and beat these guys up until they do a get, but you can't do that because American law wouldn't allow you to do it. It only works if people want to live by the rules and they want to stay in that community. But again, in Israel today, they're kind of getting around it by living both in the modern world and in their own community. In the Orthodox communities, in a Hasidic community, trust me, this is still happening. Doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen every day. But when it happens, it happens. I've seen,
That guy could call the cops.
he could, but he's also then thrown out of the community. Then he loses all his friends and he loses his community. So the Jewish community had a way of taking care of this. Can't, if you step back between two worlds, then these guys can take advantage of the rules. And the rules were there to stop society from going off the rails. And you're married to a family lawyer. Wait, we're not done. Yeah.
Question, you said there's 3 rabbis that have to, bring the-
Yes.
Okay, that just made me think, when I converted.
Yeah, you had
I
3
had
rabbis. Yeah.
rabbis.
That's a bait din. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So you have to have a bait din for these religious legal issues. You don't need 3 rabbis for a wedding because you only need to have witnesses. You only have to have 2 witnesses. You don't even have to have a rabbi for a Jewish wedding. But in order to have a get, in order to have a conversion, in order to have witnesses for like testimony in a basic trial, even in Jewish law, you have to have a beit din. You have to have 3 rabbis today, or 3 legal scholars, or if you want to call them rabbis. I mean, it's, you have to just remember, they're lawyers.
In 26
Philip.
in 26 years of practicing family law, going on 27,
Yeah.
I have only, excuse me, I've only had 1 case where a debt was an issue. Once
Yeah.
in all this time. And he wanted one, he refused, and she said, I don't care. He thought that would prevent.
Yeah, he'd have the leverage. I will tell you,
Welcome to California.
by the time right about the time you got your license and to practice family law, because Philip had a whole nother career as a journalist too. So he had another career as a journalist, but probably around the time that you entered this field, there was a show on television called LA Law. You remember that show?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And there was an episode where Corbin Burnson, who was he was the family lawyer in the practice in the firm, he represented this woman and she wanted to get from her husband and the guy wouldn't give it to her. She had become, I remember the episode vividly. She had become more religious in the ensuing time since they got divorced. She had become Baal Teshuva, she'd become religious. And she wanted to get the get. And Corbin Burnson was representing her, and the husband was being a schmuck and wouldn't give it to her until she renounced her spousal support. And he said, you're going to lose like $5 million. She goes, I don't care. I only want the get. I don't want to see him anymore. I want to get remarried. I don't want to ever think about it anymore. And he's like telling her, you're going to lose all this money. Of course, he's thinking, I'm going to lose all this money. She's like, I don't care. And in the end, of course, he kind of, ends up seeing how much this means to her. And he kind of, he's one of the grossest guys in the firm, and that he's the one who's the most shallow and the most materialistic. And, he kind of gets a lesson that, you have to have values. And so it was actually an episode that was kind of like making it look like this woman was, being very valiant for doing this. But it was kind of sad because the Jewish husband was being such a jerk. You do not need a get if you're married to a Gentile husband. Let me make it clear. And I don't want to encourage anybody. Somebody's going to say, well, he just said you don't have to. If you're married to a Gentile man, you don't need a get. So it's never even an issue. And that has actually been used as a way for women who have been in a bad situation and have gone to an Orthodox rabbi with a husband who wouldn't give them a get. I know Orthodox rabbis who've said, you know what, your husband wasn't really Jewish. How do we know? Well, he never had a ketubah. He never had a legal ketubah in the first place. Your marriage was never real. We annulled it. But if you married somebody who was obviously not Jewish, it's no issue. There was never a ketubah, legal ketubah in the first place. Marriage is annulled. No get. What?
Yep.
It's not an Orthodox ketubah.
No.
And the Orthodox ketubah is the only one that, and it's witnessed by Orthodox witnesses. It's the only one that's valid. Sorry. So it's annulled. There's like, you don't need to get, no get necessary. So I know rabbis have done it. What? Not according to Orthodox law. Wouldn't matter anyways. You wouldn't matter to you anyways. Technically speaking, according to Jewish law, you'd be in a little bit of a jam anyways, because you are Jewish, though maybe they would annul you or something like that. I don't know, but they don't care about your DNA, by the way, just so you know. The rabbis don't care about your DNA. No, seriously, they don't. But they would say that you might have to pay her anyways, because she is not, it wasn't her issue, it was your, it was.
No, it's because she put up with you for all these years. Come on.
I'll only tell you that your marriage, whether it's annulled or not, the get wouldn't be an issue. And again, the get isn't an issue today, right? Because civil law protects the bride anyways. And all of these laws were written at a time when women had no protection, and Jewish law was the only way to protect them. Now, there's a lot of discussion in here about divorces, sending her away with a get. That's really the only thing that we read about marriages. There is actually not one discussion in the entire Torah about marriages or about ketubas. The ketubas are definitely there by the time of the rabbis, and they were there earlier, but they're not mentioned by name in the Torah. They're in the Talmud. There's an entire tractate called Ketubot. There's also an entire tractate called Gittin, which are about gets. I will tell you, as interesting as they are to read, they're very interesting to read. They actually are very interesting to read, not because of that. They're filled with a whole lot of other stuff that has nothing to do with gets and with ketubas, typically in the Talmudic way. But one of the most fascinating parts of Gittin, actually, there's a whole discussion about Jews under Roman law, under Roman authority, and about the Jewish revolt against Rome. So one of the best discussions about it, the Jewish revolt in the Talmud, is actually in the tractate called Gittin. So right around the 50s, there's this amazing discussion in the Talmud about it, and it's in the tractate Gittin. Partly because, again, what's interesting is that, there were discussions during the Roman era about ketubas and about gets, because it was such a chaotic time that some people were like, even if they were divorced during that period, where's their ketubah, where's their get? What's so interesting is we found those documents. One of the most interesting documents that we found from that period is not the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's the Babatha, it's the cave that we found that's called the Bar Kokhba cave, where we found documents from people that were hiding out during the Bar Kokhba revolt, and we found a woman's get. We found her documents. We found her divorce document, which shows like one of these things. And what's so interesting about it is that the documents were there. They were hidden because she probably was in hiding, and she, wanted to have her personal documents with her while she was on the run, and she kept it with her. It was like having your social security card in your little folder with your passport and your legal documents. She was probably killed. She never could come back and get them. And we found this, and we found it, and it shows that people, absolutely, during this time, they had to have these documents with them because they never knew where they were going to wind up. And so, no, but they're in the Dead Sea Scroll museum, in the Israel Museum. They have some of those documents in that display. You can see them. So they're there. They were found, excavated. And the weird thing is exactly those type of documents that the Talmud talks about. We found them. Yeah, but they really did give us, like, we have an actual document from 2,000 years ago. Here, let me show you. I'll show you the document. It gives you the chills because it shows you let me see. Let me show you a picture of it. This is, we found we found these scrolls. This is what it was found in. It was found in the cave, we call the Cave of Letters, which is right by En Gedi, right in that area. There's Masada and En Gedi and Qumran, that whole area over there. And so these are documents. These are this woman's documents, and you can see we found her documents, and I will show you. It says she was born around 104. And again, part of where she lived was Nabatean controlled, people who built Petra, right? So it shows you that again, Jews lived with the people who built that. So here's what it says concerning marriage. The marriage contract, it talks about that. Also show dispute arose. Look at her son. She had a son named Jesus, mainly because that was a very common name at the time, not because she was. Yeah, well, Yeshu, yes, it's Yeshu. So you can see yeah. So yeah, you can see the debts that were owed. All of these things were there. And yeah, I mean, this woman kept all these documents. So anyways, Babatha. So anyways, when you look at Jewish life at that time, and again, this is from the Roman period, we actually can find these documents, but we don't know earlier than that what these documents look like. That's not true. I think we found Babylonian from a little bit earlier. In Babylonia, we found Ketubot and Getz parchments. But this is the first time we found like a complete, a woman's complete file, if you will. We found all these documents that she carried with her. It's crazy. Anyways, next law, which again is the new chapter, continues. Again, it was not really a necessarily great break, but we're going to read a couple interesting laws here. No householder shall take his father's former wife as his own wife, so as to remove his father's garment. And you can see the note, removing his garment might be, again, a way of saying taking what his father had been involved with. So you're not allowed to marry your stepmother, just so you know. She's not related to you genetically, but it's not a good thing to do. Mary, you look puzzled by that. Is it different? What is yours? That yours has that with the previous chapter? Yeah. So that's interesting. Not sure how King James has a different chapter break, but might as well be there. So yours begins chapter 1 here. No man who has testes who are crushed or whose member is cut shall be admitted to the congregation. That's a great way to begin the chapter, with the famous crushed testes and member stuff. Now, but at least it's not about the stuff about marriage. Well, there is going to be more marriage stuff. Don't worry. Now, yeah, this is an interesting law, but as you notice in the note, it's similar to other things that we've read in other places. By the way, it says we're not sure whether women would have the similar situation, but you can see there's rules about this earlier. Deuteronomy chapter 5. So what are we talking about here? Look, Talmud definitely goes into some description, more description on this, a little bit more detail physically on what's happening here, but also more importantly, what does this actually mean? And so there's a question of, well, are they allowed to be a part of the community? Are they allowed, maybe this involves marrying people within the community. There's interesting understanding that maybe they can marry but they can't marry a Jewish girl.
Couldn't be circumcised.
Perhaps. Now, there is another discussion in the Talmud, I promise you, on this issue, which is maybe this only refers to, and it doesn't say that here, but the Talmud says it, it only refers to people who did this voluntarily. Meaning eunuchs and people who would go through this, the process of this willingly, because people did this willingly. And this was known because we read it in the Bible. We read about Jeremiah's friend, Ebed Melech, who takes care of him, who's an Ethiopian eunuch. And I even showed you in the Christian stories, there are stories about Ethiopian eunuchs there too, which seems to be like a thing. There's a story, as I mentioned to you in the Christian Bible, where there's an Ethiopian eunuch that makes a appearance there. So it seems like certain communities, especially communities outside of Israel, would engage in this. And of course, we know that eunuchs were used even through the Turkish court in the harem. They would keep a eunuch in charge of the stuff. We see it in the Persian stories of Esther. We see eunuchs there. It was definitely something that was done for royalty. And there seemed to be eunuchs employed by Israel's kings. But so the Bible doesn't say this, but the Talmud says, again, maybe this isn't for people who are born in that situation. So if it was, as they use the words, if it was an act of God, it's okay. If it's an act of another human, no. Now, you can say, well, what if the person willingly did it, but what if they didn't willingly do it? What if it was done? Yeah, what if it was done in war? Not fair, right? But the answer would be, it doesn't matter. Now, here is the issue that you're going to now be. I'm going to ask you before I think maybe someone will come up with the answer. Because like people don't like this. I'm going to tell you right now, there are people who say, this isn't fair. This is not ADA compliant, this law. Right? It doesn't seem on the face of it.
Look at it a different way. I'm saying.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. So what is the rationale behind this? Why would the Torah say this? Why would the Torah put this law that, again, I'm not saying it shouldn't offend our more modern sensibilities of people with disabilities? Correct. And why is that an issue? And specifically, if a woman marries the guy, she has the expectation that she's going to provide him with kids. And if he can't, it's not fair to her. Now you can say, well, you never know. Maybe somebody can't have kids. It's just it's a fertility issue. Yes, that's true. But if you know that there's a fertility issue, that's a different situation. Now, of course, what's interesting about this is if a person is deemed to be infertile, then the assumption would be not only if he doesn't have crushed testes, but if he was married before and didn't have kids, that there might be an issue. Now, we'll tell you this. In the Orthodox world, even to this day, people who could not have kids, and you've seen it in some of your recent TV movies, right? Because for some reason, we become obsessed with Orthodox Jews. We're obsessed. Netflix in particular is obsessed with Orthodox Jews. So some of you have seen this. For people who are infertile within the Orthodox community, they will encourage them to be divorced. Now, I know that's also doesn't hit us very well, but the logic behind it is that sometimes one of those people, if not both, will not have a fertility issue with somebody else. Now, again, it's not the way we like to think about things because we don't get married to procreate anymore, but our ancestors did. And there was an understanding that at least that was going to be a possibility and should be encouraged. So when people couldn't, rather than say they're defective or they're never going to have kids, they actually encouraged people to say, maybe this isn't the right fit for you. And then encourage them to find other spouses. Again, it totally goes against our idea of being married to somebody for love. I know it's not what you want to hear, but that was actually the motivation behind it. And to say to somebody, we are going to provide a situation for you to have children. Now, couldn't have, yeah, the Chabad guy couldn't have kids, right? The seventh rabbi, the rabbinate ended with him. They still think he's going to come back. They still think he's coming back with Elvis and Bruce Lee. The Bavitcher Rebbe. I don't know that they want to hear me say that, but I just said it. Anyways, he's been dead for 25 years. So, but they believe he's frozen. You know, maybe some of his people, not everyone, but some of them believe he's frozen. Or that maybe, no, he's buried in Queens.
That's right. Yeah.
He's buried in Queens and you can go and pray at his tomb, but maybe he's frozen in there. Anyway, the Rev Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now here's a weird one because the translation here is absolutely horrible. No one misbegotten shall be admitted into the congregation of Adonai. No descendant of such, even in the 10th generation, shall be admitted into the congregation of Adonai. Now, misbegotten is like, I don't even know what you think of when you hear that. But that's not the right translation. What's the translation, Mary? She used the word bastard. Oh my God. It is actually the word that is translated usually for this word, which, yes, as Sheldon said, is the word that we know very well in Hebrew and in Yiddish, especially Yiddish, mamzer. Mamzer, we mean, when we say mamzer, we oftentimes mean the guy's a bastard, right? But it literally means a bastard. So it really doesn't have a very good connotation. It really is assaulting somebody's birth. Being a mamzer is being somebody who's born of an illicit relationship, being born out of wedlock, being born, and I want to make it clear, wedlock didn't mean parents weren't married, because guess what? According to Jewish law, the minute your parents had sex, they were married. So there was no, oh, this child was a mistake. There is no mistake in Jewish law because the parents were married the minute that happened. The only problem is that the woman was married to somebody else when she had this child. Now, it's not the kid's fault, and we understand that. It is not fair that the kid was born to a person whose parentage was messed up because the mother slept with another guy who is not her husband. Okay? That's the only way this happens, just so you know.
I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
Her husband dies in battle or dies. He has a baby. He's not married.
Yeah. That's not a mamzer.
That's what I thought.
Not a mamzer. Now, yep. So there's no issue. The only time this happens, just so you understand, the only time this could happen is in a situation where it's known that the woman was not married to the husband and she was married to somebody else. It's the only way it could happen. So essentially you ask yourself, how did this even happen? Because the woman should have been executed. The man and the woman should have been executed. So how did this happen?
Well, thank you for telling me.
So how does this happen? It happens very rarely, and it could happen, but there is a situation where the person's a mamzer. Could it have happened that the person, they didn't know the parent, they didn't know who the father was, and maybe that would have happened, maybe, but still the assumption would have been if the woman was raped, then it was it's almost never going to happen, but it happened. There's a law for it. So clearly it happened. So what would happen to this guy, right? Correct. So what would happen in this situation? At least the way the Talmud tells us, that people would then marry a mamzeres, a woman who also didn't have. So, excuse me, it wasn't that he could never marry. He just couldn't marry somebody who at least wasn't another mamzeret, another person I don't want to call them a bastard, but a person whose lineage was not according to plan. Now, he could also marry someone who was not Jewish who converted. So the purpose of this, of course, is to make sure people know who their parents are. Not so much an issue in the Jewish community, but it is in some communities. And it is one of the things that breaks apart a community. It's not the only thing. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it is one of the things that breaks up a community. Not knowing who your parents are. Not having parents who take responsibility for you, not knowing who your father is. Now, we can joke about it and we can, laugh at what, people used to see on Maury Povich show and stuff like that. But there's a consequence to it. And we've seen it happen in our own country. So there's the rules that exist here are there to prevent society from going down the toilet. There's not a whole lot we can do to prevent society from going down the toilet, but there are some things. And one of the things we can do is prevent and to help families not have situations where this kind of stuff can happen. So we have laws in this country now. And again, Philip's been knee deep in it for a long time now, but there are laws in this country to help prevent that. What we use in our country, I think it's fair to say, is we use a financial incentive in order to create responsibility. We did it traditionally through religion and through community by saying, originally, this is the way our society is based, meaning that the laws of ancient Israel were the laws of the country. And so this is what happened. Later on, when Jews were living in their own semi-autonomous communities, these laws were in effect, and they're how we know who our families are and where they come from. Most cultures and communities had rules essentially to enforce this as well.
Baba?
Yeah.
One of the reasons I tell people that marriage is important, it's really in many ways more important for the man. And the reason why is when you have a child, if you're not married, and the woman, and there's no parentage judgment, there's nothing. And the woman decides, you know what, you're not the guy I want, and you're not going to see your child. And then the man comes to me and says, yeah, but we've been living together for 3 years or whatever. And I'm on the birth certificate. And I tell them, so what? And they say, what do you mean? I said, the birth certificate is not dispositive. So you never went to court, or even without going to court, filed paperwork with her confirming your parentage. So you're nobody right now. And now you have to go to court to establish that you're dad. Think about that.
Interesting. Well, I think again, in your work, but especially again in high profile divorces, it becomes an issue, parentage, but for us, it still comes down to, usually in America at least, to the financial imperative. Judaism actually said, we're not going to allow our community, if our community can't protect families, and again, wives and children being the most vulnerable, then our society's doomed, right? We can't have a situation where men can leave behind a family and there's no responsibility. So we had these laws that were in effect.
But
And
there's another financial.
And by the way, I just want to say something, Philip. Judaism clearly in the Torah allows for divorce. So Judaism never said, hey, Your marriage, you're married, you're stuck. Sorry, bad decision. Your family made a bad decision. You made a bad decision. Judaism never said that. And I want to make that clear because there are traditions that are old, but not as old as ours, that have said the opposite. Okay? So understand that Judaism, and at least, again, based on the Torah, that's how I don't understand how you can say it. Like the rabbis, fine. Okay, you could say, well, they made it up, whatever. They didn't. They based it on what the Torah said. They said, well, clearly we can give somebody a get. And the Torah allows for it. The Torah actually is more descriptive of it. What? Because there are lines from the Gospels themselves where Jesus basically prohibits and lays out why somebody can't be divorced. So it's not just like the church invented it. The Catholic Church is actually following the Gospels on that. So I want to make it clear. It's not like Christians just woke up one day and said, we're not going to let people get divorced. They were basing it on Jesus's traditions. I will say that there were probably some rabbis during Jesus's time that were harsher about marriage and didn't want people to be divorced. But my guess is that there were always rabbis who were more tolerant about it. And you could go to, and you could find and know that there was a rabbi who'd say, you know what, you're not in a good marriage. We're going to allow this to stop. So I think it exists even in the rabbinic world today, that like some rabbis are known to really not want people to be divorced and will try to keep people together, maybe, to an extreme, and then others will. But Jewish law allows for divorce, always has allowed for divorce going back to the Torah. So I want to make it clear. Yeah. Catholic tradition on that veered away from the Torah. It is not, you just read it. Yeah, Philip.
The federal government actually, like Jewish law, wants you to get married. And why? Because if you're not married and you have children and there's no court order that says who the father is, or there's no voluntary declaration under California law that says who the father is, and the father dies, then mom cannot get Social Security death benefits.
That's
for
true.
kids. So, really cheap form of life insurance, because if dad's working, he's paying into Social Security. And even if they're not married, if there's a legal document, not a birth certificate, but a legal document that says he's the father and he dies, then the children can get those benefits.
Yeah. Yeah.
They deal with that all the time.
If the Torah says that you don't need, that you can get divorced, what is this about a get that only a man can okay?
That's what he's talking
But,
about.
well, okay, by the way, I just want to show you one thing real quick. Here's the confrontation in the Gospels, right? This is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three of the synoptic Gospels. The Pharisees, meaning the rabbis, by the way, right? The early rabbis said, is it lawful, asked Jesus, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? He answered, have you not read that he made them for the beginning, made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined in one flesh, right? That's Genesis, right? That's right at the beginning, right? So they are no longer two flesh, but one flesh. Therefore, God is joined together. Let not man put asunder. That's the famous line, right? That's where he said, you can't undo what God did. Now, in all fairness, the Torah does say that, but that's his midrash on it. Where did he get it from? Probably other rabbis who taught the same thing. So I just want to tell you, I don't think he was speaking out of turn. I think there were other rabbis who said, you become one flesh. You can't be not be in flesh. But that's not what the Bible said. It said there was. So then they said, why did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and put her away? By saying Moses said it, you just read it. Deuteronomy said it. Moses said it. So they said to Jesus, okay, you're going to give us that midrash, which, by the way, they knew, and they knew that he didn't invent it. They knew that there were other rabbis who were teaching the same thing. It's a fairly mystical teaching, and it's a nice teaching. Love it, right? We don't actually say it at Jewish weddings, by the way, because it's not in our Bible. what God has made, let no man, they actually say that at Christian services. We don't, it's not in the Torah. So why did Moses then say, you can do it? He said to them, for your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning, it was not so. And so Jesus's answer was, yeah, God gave us a way out, but that's not the way he wants it. Now, I have to tell you, based on what Jesus just said, they put him to a test. The Christian Bible says this. It's not us saying he said this. He said it. And all he did was explain why the Torah allows for it. But I don't think they caught him in anything. I think he just gave him the teachings that he learned and the way that he learned it, which I mean, it's not the way I would interpret the Bible, but there are other rabbis who would say similar things. And we say it at a wedding. You know, the Baal Shem Tov says that when, two souls find each other, that they become one soul. He quoted it. The Baal Shem Tov quoted the Torah in Genesis as well, which is that, again, there's a mystical thing that happens when two people find each other. And that's where you get this beshert, idea where somebody finds the other part of themselves and they get completed. You complete me, right? The famous, the famous Jerry Maguire, you complete me. I will tell you that Judaism has that as a mystical idea, and it definitely exists. I would also tell you it's a really, really tough thing to live up to. And I will tell you that I don't say it. I would never say that to a couple. And I don't follow that tradition in that one person is going to give you everything that you need in the world to complete you. That to me is a little scary. I'm just saying, it's not my teaching. It's not my teaching. And I will tell you that it's a dangerous teaching because I think it sets up an expectation that is impossible for one person to do for another person. That's my own teaching.
Don't you think that they try, but Orthodox anyway, they try to match someone up that's very much like you, it comes from your background, everything else, so you'd be more like.
Yeah. So Joanne's saying yes. In a community where they have shared values and shared backgrounds, that it's most likely. Look, Joanne, it's weirder than that. Your grandparents or great grandparents were probably first or second cousins. So just so you understand, we go back 7 generations, we're all related to each other. So just so you understand, there was an even deeper connection that we had, which is that we were all part of one very extended family for most of us. So, that's the reality, I don't know what to tell you other than it wasn't just our community. Lots of communities were like that.
Mary, I became one soul with Mary. For one. It doesn't happen all the time. We're saying you don't teach it, but
That's wonderful. No, I mean, it's
nothing.
how long have you been married for?
I've been 29 years in that.
That's a long time. That's a
I
long
don't know how the hell she puts up with me.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Was born Jewish.
Yeah.
Who's his father?
Don't ask me because according to the Bible, it's a guy named Joseph, but there's other, yes, but
Like, paperwork, like, all this is so.
I'll tell you, and we've discussed it in the Tuesday class before. Jesus's lineage in the book of Matthew is somewhat based on the Bible, but there are some mistakes. There are some errors based on the genealogies that exist. They're not horrible differences, but they don't follow the Bible completely, but they pretty much go through King David, and they have the order of the kings in there. We've read it, we've looked at it, we've shown it before, we've shown it a lot. People on Tuesdays almost have memorized our king's chart, but there are a little bit of differences. And the theory is that the reason why there's a little bit of difference is because they went for a symmetric genealogy, and that they dropped a couple people. Why? Because there's 10 generations from Adam to Abraham. There's 10 generations from Abraham to David. There's 14 generations from David to I forget who, and then another 14 generations from there to So that like they wanted 10, 10, 14, 4. So they came up with like a round number. And people were like, well, maybe that's why the some of the people dropped out because it's not exact. And if you looked at it, it was close, but not quite. So look, I mean, look, the reason that the genealogy is there, period, is because for a Jewish audience, they wanted to establish that Jesus was a descendant of King David and therefore could be the Messiah. But 10th generation, by the way, as you see right here, is a symbolic number. It's definitely considered like, I mean, first of all, 10 generations would be like 300 years. It's a long time. It's a long time. And like, I mean, that's a dynasty. I mean, that's like, it's not even like you would even know the people. Like if you could know their names, that would be great, right? If you knew 10 generations, most of us have a hard time going back 10 generations. Not everybody. I don't want you, to offend anybody who knows 10 generations back, but at least within the Jewish community, it's tough to do that. I know Mary does, she, some people do, but in the Jewish community, it's very hard to go back that far. Because we've been on the road so many times and so many of our lists and so many of our documents got destroyed. We don't have them. We don't have a family. Most of us don't have a family Bible because those books would have been destroyed. But there are some families that have been able to reconstruct genealogies. I could only go back like 3 generations, and then my dad hired a genealogist, and we ended up going back 4 more generations that we didn't have. So occasionally you can do this. And you can do it. Yeah.
And they had David the Cutting and somebody else.
Yeah.
Only went in their genealogy, and they only went like 3 generations.
It's very hard. It's very hard for our community to do that. Now, what we do know, and where I came up with the 7 generations were related, is the DNA. The DNA doesn't lie. And we know from the DNA how we go back. And the people who know this the most have done the studies on it, and they know that we'll get a matchup with you'll get a matchup with virtually anybody in the Jewish community who's 100% Ashkenazi if you go back about 7 generations, within 7 generations, if not more. We're starting to see it more because again, we're doing the DNA and people are popping up the information and they're putting everything with ancestry.com and they're getting everything together. So it is the picture is starting to come together. There's more pieces. There's pieces we'll probably never have, but there's a lot of pieces that we do have, and the DNA doesn't lie. The DNA shows us, and the DNA has showed that I forget what percentage of us now, but I think they keep changing it. But most of us as most Ashkenazi Jews go back to 4 common women that lived in Europe 1,000 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
One thing I learned.
Yeah.
My brother, our generation,
Mhm.
was that we're part Ukrainian and part Polish, not Russian.
Yeah.
I know it's changed, but that's what it said on.
Yeah, it might change again. I'm just telling you. Because we're starting to pick apart some of those unknown things. I remember when we first did my mom's DNA, it turned out she was like 0.02% Eskimo or something like that. And we're like, come on, it can't be right. And sure enough, that's changed now to something like, Estonian or Lithuanian or something like that, but it's probably going to change again. So some of this stuff is changing as we go. But the reality is that we're the DNA is actually showing us. Here, I'll show you the matriarchs that were. I'll show you this was from the Jerusalem Post. This is kind of wild. This was first reported a long time ago. This was 2006, and I think they've gotten stuff since then. This one just came up quick. 40% of Ashkenazi come from, they're not the Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, right? Although they probably weren't named Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. 4 Jewish founding mothers who lived in Europe 1,000 years ago have been credited with being the ancestors of nearly half of all Ashkenazi Jews, who constitute the majority of the current Jewish population, right? So about 40% of us can trace our ancestry back to 4 women who lived 1,000 years ago. Now that's going to change, and it's going to, eventually it'll be 80% can trace their ancestry back to 10 women. But that's how small the bottleneck is on that.
Wow.
So this is the guy who did this is in Haifa, in Rambam. He's known for the 1997 discovery of the Aaronite code, right? The fact that they did a DNA test on people who were Kohanim. So this is
But not Levites.
I think they've now also established it for Levites. Yeah. So that is, that's what's happening with us with that. So the fact that, again, we know a lot of this DNA, we know that this exists, allows us to look at this and say, well, how do you know something can be for 10 generations? The rabbis who lived during the time of Jesus, right? So now we're talking 14 or so generations after Moses. They said, you know what? We don't know. We don't know. The Babylonian destruction, Maccabee period, the Roman tortures that we're going through, people getting raped, people being driven out. We don't know. We don't know who's people. We don't know who's a momser anymore. They said, you can't know. Nobody can be determined as a momser. And they said, we haven't known for a while. They said, we haven't known for generations. So it wasn't like they just woke up one day and say, hey, we can't do this anymore. They said, we haven't known for a while. We haven't known really since the Babylonian destruction. The records were wiped out. People got mixed up. Everyone got mixed up. We don't know, which is why this next law, we don't follow it. And the rabbi said, we don't follow this. No Ammonite, Moabite shall be admitted to the congregation of Adonai. No descendants of such, even in the 10th generation, shall ever be admitted into the congregation of Adonai, because they did not meet you with food on the water on your journey after you left Egypt, because they hired Balaam, the son of Beor, from Petora Aram Naharaim, to curse you. The story of Balaam and Balak, right? We read about that in Numbers, famous, Matovu. So the Moabites and the Ammonites, even though they're kind of more closely related to you, at least they're through Lot, right? They're through Abraham's nephew. They're kind of related to us. They're Semitic. They spoke pretty much the same language as us, because we've discovered their documents. Not a lot of their documents, but we found the Moabite stone, the Mesha stele, which is at the Louvre. We have the Deir Allah text we found from the Ammonites. We've got some of their texts. Their texts are essentially biblical Hebrew. They spoke the same language as us. The Torah tells us that they're related to us, but we're not allowed to have them come in our community. Guess what? We did. Ruth was a Moabite lady. So we violated that law. We know it because the Bible tells us that she was a Moabite. So we know that King David, his great-grandmother, was a Moabite. Violated this law. So this law clearly wasn't even taken before the Babylonian destruction. It wasn't even followed by then. It wasn't followed, like, if this was written, if the Deuteronomy text was written during the time of King Josiah, Josiah is generations removed from King David. He's 10 generations later. He was part Moabite. If you follow the story of Ruth, look, we don't know, but we know that this wasn't followed. And the rabbi said, we can't follow this because we don't know who's who. We don't know who's who. We don't know who's Moabite or Ammonite. But I will tell you this. What's interesting about this is it has nothing to do with the DNA, because the rabbis knew it. The Torah knows it. Everybody knows it. They're related to us. They're related to us. But it's because of what they did. It's because they didn't meet us with food and water, that they tried to curse us. They tried to destroy us. Because of that, they don't get to come in, not because of their DNA, but because of who they are, what their values are, who they really are, which is their behavior. It's not their genealogy. It's their behavior. It's what they did. We don't like those people. We don't want them in our community, right? Adonai, right? God Adonai refused to heed Balaam. Instead, your God Adonai turned the curse into blessing for you. For your God Adonai loves you You shall never concern yourself with their welfare or benefit as long as you live. So you don't deal with them. They're not your problem. They're not your concern. You don't have anything to do with those people because they're not good. They try to destroy you. You don't worry about them. But here's the weird thing. The next line, it says, you shall not abhor an Edomite, for such is your kin, and you shall not abhor an Egyptian, for you are a stranger in that land. Children born to them may be admitted into the congregation of Adonai in the third generation. So eventually, those people can be part of our community. Why do you laugh at that, Doreen? Why?
Because of what the Egyptians did.
Yeah. The Egyptians made us slaves. They actually enslaved us.
Tell you how many generations would have to pass.
I agree with you. Didn't what the Egyptians did, weren't they worse than the Edomites? I mean, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Edomites, it says they're your kin, right? Because they're descendants from Esau. They're actually descendants of Abraham. They're descendants of Isaac. They're descendants of Isaac. They're our cousins. So we're okay with them. We let them in our community. And we did. Because that was King Herod. He was an Edomian. He was an Edomite.
Was it?
Yeah, so we let him in. Now, according to tradition, he also was raised as a Jew. His father was a convert, was converted to Judaism, and he was at least born into it, maybe. But Doreen's point is very important. Wasn't what the Egyptians did much worse? They kept us slaves for hundreds of years, generations as slaves.
God smote them.
God punished them.
And he wants us.
Now, no, Doreen, you can make the argument they paid their price. They paid their price because they got punished. But Doreen says, no, they don't deserve it. Now, the Torah does also open something up. And of course, the rabbis build on this, which is something very interesting, which is, yes, the Egyptians definitely turned on us. However, there was a time when they let us live there during the time of Joseph. They opened up their country and they let us live there and treated us very well. During the time of Joseph, Pharaoh said, come, live wherever you want. And we were strangers in that land. Now, what's interesting here is that there's this understanding in Judaism that if somebody does something good for you and then turns on you, we don't only remember the fact that they turned on us. We remember that they did something good for us at one point. People who've never done anything good for us, like the Ammonites and Moabites, we don't cut them a break. Now, it doesn't say we destroy them. None of this says you kill them, but it does tell us in some cases that they're not our problem. You don't worry about them. They're not you don't let them in. You don't let these people in. But in some cases, again, at least with the Edomites and the Egyptians, you can even let them into your community. It's a very strange law. And it's one that where people go, the Egyptians, they have the same reaction that Doreen just said, how could the Egyptians get a pass? And the thing is that we remember the good thing that they did to us. And that's something interesting because when we look back at history, there's this understanding that the countries that the Jewish people lived in, were they always anti-Semitic, or was there a tradition of hospitality at some point? It's very interesting because we are confronted with that. And, to some extent, like if you look at Jewish history, you say, well, the Poles let us into the country, but then they turned on us. Or they turned on us when they were controlled by the Nazis. So is that really Poland's fault, or there's the anti-Semitism always there? Or what, the Ukrainians, were they bad to us because they were controlled by the Soviet Union, or because they were controlled by the Nazis? Or they like, at what point is it them, or is it the system, or is it the same country? The Egyptians are not the same people that they were when they were the pharaohs, right? They're Arabs now. They're not the same people. So there's a weird thing there about is there an understanding that it's the same culture that's there, right? Is it the same people? Jesse?
I was gonna ask because I keep thinking, because they always mention every time about Egyptians that they're strangers.
Yeah.
So I'm almost thinking you can't hate them for hating you because you're a stranger. It's kind of like the thing of, when you go over to somebody else's house, the rules tend to be a bit lighter because you're not to know their traditions. Like when I was invited to a Catholic church to be a groomsman at my friend's wedding, they were teaching me the customs, like bow before the priest, like speak this way, this is where you're gonna sit, and you're gonna act this way. Because they were nicer to me because they're like, look, he's a Jew, he doesn't know our rules. Whereas one of the other groomsmen was a Catholic, and so my buddy, he was getting chewed out. It's like, you're a Catholic, you should know how to behave in here. Like, you can't act like this in the church, you should know this. But then they're like, he's different, he's a foreigner to these traditions, he doesn't know our customs. And I thought the same thing when I invited my friend to come to a Saturday morning service. I told him all the stuff because I'm like, he doesn't know this, he's Christian, he wouldn't know all the traditions of when the Torah comes around. So it's the same thing of like, because it was worse that the neighboring peoples hired a pagan prophet to curse you because that was your brother doing that. That's a horrible thing. Whereas, these strangers, like, sure, it's not a good thing, but again, like, there's
Yes,
no relation to them.
I think that
That's why I think
it
it
is,
reminds you every time that, hey, you guys don't know each other, you're strangers, both ethnically, religiously, genetically.
yeah, I think there is that issue with the Egyptians, which is that they, at least for a time, treated us with hospitality, which we are going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're capable of that. Looking at it over Jewish history, over the span of Jewish history, there are not many places that we can say did that. Because in some cases, like let's say in the Arab world, we were living in some of these countries and, the Arabs came through and conquered the country, like in Israel. We were living there, it was under the Byzantines, the Arabs came through, kicked out the Byzantines, and we were now under Arab authority. Look, there's different, like you'd almost say, well, another people took it over, and so now we're under their control. I'd say the only country that we can look at and really give a break to, because at least, and it's not the same government and it's not run the same way, but like it's the same country. The only country that we could look at and say they gave us a home and they treated us with pretty good, we still had to follow Islamic law, but Turkey, the Ottomans were pretty much the only people that, again, there were times of persecution, but they weren't anywhere near persecution in other places. And for the most part, the Ottoman Turks treated us pretty well. Current government of Turkey is not a very friendly country, definitely not as friendly to Israel as the previous secular Turkish governments were. But even still, there are Turks and Jewish people in Turkey today that are still living there and worshiping there. And I wouldn't say these are their best days. I mean, that's a nice way of putting it. They're not feeling as safe and secure as they used to. I went there 28 years ago and things were much better then for them. But there's still a few thousand Jews that live in Turkey and pretty well established community. Pretty wealthy community actually too. Some of the people are still there. So that's one of the few countries that I can say, look, the country is still kind of the same country and they've treated the Jews fairly well, but at least a country with a sizable, Jewish community. I mean, Jews have been pretty well treated in Sweden and Denmark, but there's like 500 Jews there. So it's not really like, it hasn't been there's a little bit more now, but, and so there were times when Jews were treated well and times when they weren't. And if you're going to hold a country responsible, look, do we hold Germany responsible for the Holocaust? And before that, other times when Jews were massacred during the time of the Black Plague or during the time of the Crusades? I don't know, but there were other times during Jewish history where they were treated well in Germany, and that was the homeland of Ashkenaz. It's where Ashkenazi Jews came from the Rhine, from that area, of Mainz, Speyer, and Worms. Most of those Jews that lived 1,000 years ago that were related to those four women, that's where they lived. They lived in those towns of Mainz, Speyer, and Worms, some of the oldest Jewish communities in Europe. So look, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer of like what does it mean to you? When you go to Germany, you can see both histories. I've seen both histories. I've been to concentration camps in Germany. I've also been to the mikvahs in Mainz, that go back 1,000 years, the Jewish cemeteries where people are buried that lived good lives and were the home to where the Yiddish language came from. I don't know what to tell you. The language that we spoke for 1,000 years was a German language that we felt so comfortable with that it became our language. So, you know, that's the being a stranger in a strange land for us gives that country some credibility with us. So that is the law of other nations, not the end. It's not the last word. We're going to read a little bit more today. Kitetze, again, kitetze, we've read that word before. It usually means when you go into battle, when you go out. And here, when your men go out as a troop against your enemies, be on your guard against anything untoward. Now that's weird. What does that even mean? Well, if anyone among you has been rendered impure by a nocturnal emission, he must leave the camp and he must not re-enter the camp. Now that's weird because, again, that seems like a minor thing that would render the camp impure. But there was an understanding that when you were in battle, that you were actually supposed to be pure. You were actually supposed to almost be like a priest. Look at the next line. Toward evening, he shall bathe in water, and at sundown, he may re-enter the camp. That's what Kohanim did. That's what somebody who had Sa'arat did. This is what people had to do in order to be pure. Further, there should be an area for you outside of camp where you may relieve yourself. You're not even allowed to use the area around there. You have to dig latrines, right? With your gear, you shall have a spike. And when you have squatted, you shall dig a hole with it and cover up your excrement. I mean, this law of war tells you that even thousands of years ago, Jews understood that even in battle, you don't become animals. You bring a shovel with you in your bag to dig, like, understand that people didn't do that in battle like a week ago. So people,
Modern people still don't even know what irrigation is.
this is unbelievable. This, look, you understand that in most times of war, what killed more people was not being killed in battle, it was being killed by disease. I mean, it's a fact. More Americans died during the Spanish-American War of disease than in battle. It's a fact. More people died of syphilis and pneumonia and tuberculosis, in World War I than died for our country. I mean, some countries got devastated. I'm not going to say every country, but for American GIs, I mean, it's unbelievable what we didn't do as a country. And it happened even in the Civil War. People were dying of disease that could have been prevented if they had known about doing surgery with it's unbelievable. So the Torah 3,000 years ago told people you have to have a spike, you have to have a shovel. I mean, I don't know the word spike, but whatever. I mean, what's the King James say? 14. A what? A paddle. I mean, that's even a better translation. The understanding is it's a shovel. A spike, what is that? What's that? It's for digging a hole, but it's kind of tough to do that. A shovel to dig your stuff with. I mean, I don't understand why they had to use the word spike, but that's the translation.
It's back because they didn't have little.
I know. But the point is that you understand it's to dig a hole. And this is about as graphic as the Torah gets when it comes to going to the bathroom, human waste. I mean, like the Torah doesn't even like the words, are so, euphemistic, right? It doesn't like your excrement. That's translation is. What is the translation you have, Mary? That's the translation. Vekisata etsetecha, what comes out of you. So excrement is not a bad word because it's kind of like a literal, that's the literal excrement, it's coming from you, it's coming out of you. That's what the Torah says. So that's the way the Torah says the words go to the bathroom, which we still use euphemisms to do this day. Isn't that amazing? Since your God Adonai moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you, let your camp be holy. Let God not find anything unseemly among you and turn away from you. So, yeah, understanding that your camp, your military camp, is got to be holy. It has to be pure. So
And
the
clean.
soldiers were really almost like priests. Yeah. Joyce?
Clean. It has to be clean.
Yeah.
And
There's
if
an
you're
understanding.
clean, you don't spread disease.
Yes. And it's also this idea that you are, when you're engaging in battle, you're not an animal. You're actually, again, maintaining levels of hygiene. You're keeping levels almost of purity of body and spirit, that you don't descend into an animal. And think about what message that sends to a soldier, which is when you're engaging in battle, it's not a great thing that you're doing. We're not happy that you're doing it. It's not something we're celebrating. We're not creating monsters. We're literally telling people that when they go into battle, God is with you. And so you have to act like you're in the presence of God. Because so many people in history, and I'm talking about 2 days ago, seem to think that when they go into battle, God's not watching anymore. And the Jewish people refuse to live like that. And when we
Yes.
go into battle right now at this moment, there are people that are preparing themselves spiritually and emotionally and mentally for this moment more than they are really physically. There's a video that some of you might have seen. I'm not going to show it right now, but it's hard to explain. You can see it in the video though. There's a guy who goes up to a soldier in Israel. It was like a day ago, and the guy tries to give him some food. Right? He says to the soldier, you can see it in the exchange. He says to him, I want to give you some food. He goes, I don't want food. He says, can I have your tzitzit? And the guy on the street says, I only have my tzitzit, but I'm going to give them to you. And the guy says, yeah, he says, I'm going to give you, that's all I need. And so the guy said, this was yesterday news. So, you can find the video. I don't know, it's out there. Let's see if I have. So it just happened yesterday. Yeah.
They were doing the Torah reading before going to
Yeah. So that's happening right now. So I just saw the video. I was on some social media site that somebody sent it to me. Just no, he says, I don't want food, just give me your tzitzit. The guy pulls it off and puts it on him. So there's an understanding that again, we have to understand that that's what's going to happen in the next few days, that people are going to try to live and even die, and whatever happens during the course of battle, to understand that they're in the presence of God.
It's a good point, because Prager makes that in here on that point where he's saying, brings in the old quote is cleanliness is next to godliness. Because like he made us in our image, so he doesn't want us wallowing in our own filth like animals. That's for them to do. And
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing of like, yeah, you are supposed, because that's the main thing I noticed between the religious types and the atheist types, is that we understand that we are above the animals. Not that we can abuse animals, but we have to be higher than that. Yeah, there's a handful of animals that vaguely understand hygiene, but only to like keep one away from the other. But we know like, no, we keep it away, clean it, don't let it near anything that we're gonna put in our mouth. like all that kind of stuff, and it's because we were made a lot higher up, that we were made to be in his image, so we shouldn't just be wallowing in our own filth and doing it wherever we want.
Yep.
It's an interesting.
That being said, pet service is this Saturday at 12 o'clock. So don't forget. And cats, yes, cats are,
They don't clean up after themselves, they just know to keep it away from their food. They
yes.
know to eat it, they're like, I'm gonna eat this, I'm not gonna do it next to it. But it's an interesting thing to think of for myself as well, to like, to keep yourself, I guess, whole in a sense, because I know my biggest flaw is wrath, anger. I'm like, yeah, he doesn't want me being some, bloodthirsty animal looking to, hurt people or shoot people like in the battle right now. It's like, no, be a human.
Yeah.
I made you not to be an animal, so you shouldn't just be looking to spill blood and act like a maniac the first chance you get. So, kind of how.
Yeah, it's pretty wild that law in the Torah is, these laws about going into battle are there for a reason. And unfortunately, these are going to be invoked right now. Yeah, Philip.
It's kind of interesting, the head of British Bomber Command in World War II unleashed horrible night raids on German cities and firebombed them, killed tens of hundreds of thousands of civilians. And that was war, but after the war, when this really came to light, he was in many ways stunned by British society and not given the promotions or awards that other British generals received. So, it's also the way, in retrospect, they looked upon this as being too much.
Well, we will tell you this, in the 75 years of the IDF, and Israel has been in some really bad wars and is about to be in another really bad war. There are no cases of, it's not that there are no cases, there's no cases of encouraged or unpunished situations where rape occurred by Israeli soldiers. I have to tell you, as far as I know, it's one of the only armies where that's never happened. The United States generally in battle didn't engage in it, though there are cases even in Vietnam, and obviously we saw a movie that was made on that situation a few years ago, Uncommon Valor. There's been movies made about rape during the course of war, and Israel has been very strict about that in its history. I don't want to finish with that though, because as much as that's what's on our mind right now, and it's a good place to end. And there's no real, as I said, there's really no good place to end in Deuteronomy. I just want you to see one thing, which is that Jewish law also was very forward when it came to this. You shall not turn over to the master a slave who seeks refuge within your from that master. Such individuals shall live with you in any place they may choose among the settlements in your midst, wherever they please. You must not ill-treat them. Now that tells us that somebody who is a runaway slave, once they ran away from their master, you are not allowed to turn them back over to their master. Understand that was not the law in this country in the 1860s.
Oh, it wasn't.
The Dred Scott case was one of the most famous. It's like when you learn about American history, you learn about the Dred Scott case. So American law, including the Supreme Court of this country, upheld the rights of a slave owner to take possession of his slave and to keep his slave, even if he was in free territory. So just so you understand that even if that slave lived. Yes. Yep. And so the idea that somehow Jewish law permitted slavery, understand that it did, but it also made it very difficult to keep. And to some extent, again, if your slave ran away, you were out of luck, because if he ran away, you couldn't get him back. So you had to protect that person. And again, maybe again from our own experience of being slaves. Look, we can keep going on because I'll show you the next law says no Israelite woman shall be a prostitute, nor shall any Israelite man be a prostitute. And I will tell you, I don't know what to tell you other than it's a different law. It's a different word for prostitute, as it says earlier on or later on, as we read in Ezekiel over and over again, the word zonah. The word here is used as kadesha and kadesh, which is a sacred or cultic prostitute, which is maybe the translation, Mary. What does your translation say? Whore, which is not that translation either, but it is something that, again, Jewish law definitely prohibits people from being cultic prostitutes. It definitely doesn't encourage prostitution within the country. And in the last law, it says, that we're going to read today, is you shall not bring the fee of a whore or the pay of a dog into the house of God, Adonai, in fulfillment of any vow, for both are abhorrent to your God, Adonai. It's
Wow.
probably not literally the pay of a dog, because a dog isn't really being employed. What is it? Probably another word for a male prostitute. Makes a lot more sense than a whore and a dog. The word kelev was probably what they also used as a nickname. It is a word for dog, but for a male prostitute. And here the word that he used is the word zonah. Doesn't say again here that the woman isn't allowed to be a common prostitute, but you can't use her pay for the temple. You can't use her money for the fulfillment of a vow to God, at least it says. So you couldn't use the wages of that. That may be a little bit of a difference between, again, being a prostitute for the sake of like being an escort versus being a prostitute for the sake of worshiping another god, which is, again, maybe splitting hairs, but understand that Jewish law doesn't encourage that behavior necessarily, but it also wants you to know that there might be some gray areas when it comes to this. Does Israel law today allow for prostitution? It does. It doesn't allow for people to be a pimp or a madam and force people into prostitution. Very gray area, and it's one that Israel has tried to protect women from being forced into prostitution or to engage or to essentially be in sexual slavery. So there's a difference. And again, it might be splitting hairs, but it is something to think about. As I heard today that California law was just changed to allow for prostitution to be essentially be practiced out in the open again, which then leads to a whole nother issue of keeping women safe. I just read about it in Philip's hometown of San Diego.
No, that was National City. No.
Okay, it's not San Diego. Splitting hairs. It's across the border. It's Castaic. It's Castaic versus, but Philip clearly heard the story too. But if it's going on in National City, it's probably going on across the border in San Diego. Okay, all right. It's in Chula Vista in National City, but not in San Diego. Believe me, El Cajon Boulevard is still a place of prostitution. Anyways, on a lighter note, though, again, these laws are help keep us from descending into chaos, and it's good to know that our laws are protecting us, even if American law will not, Philip. American law is not, because again, we passed some stupid bill that allowed people to essentially go back out on the streets. So anyways, folks, take care. And we'll see you. Please stay safe, everybody, and bring your pets to services on Saturday at 12 o'clock. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Bye.